So yeah, absolutely. So yeah, so let's kind of move on to, you know, you've got through, you had this kind of huge, basically beast, I suppose, and you suddenly realize that it kind of almost, I could see like a light bulb shining and turning on in your head, saying, what am I doing all this work for? When actually, if I just concentrated on this side of things, this kind of moves forward. So yeah, so how did that kind of come about, where you really started to see this strategy clearly?
So yeah, it was definitely through that COVID lockdown. You know, that was very much a period of reflection and change, and then planning. And it was interesting actually, because the real crunch point was when we were on this new build development and the main contractor went bust. That was quite a traumatic period to go through, especially because then all the subbies were coming and knocking on my door going, where's our money? It's like, well, paid the contractor, they've not paid you, and they've gone bust. So it was quite a difficult thing to navigate. But within that period, it was obviously challenging for a lot of other people as well in many ways. And we found kind of, not my first unicorn deal, but my first, after I kind of termed the unicorn phrase, the next one, which we found as a direct to vendor property through that first lockdown. And it was a guest house in Chester, which was a large guest house, 14 ensuite rooms, 2-bed flat. Which there was a very obvious need for the vendor wanted to dispose of it. They had a high motivation. They wanted to retire. Owning a guest house in the middle of a COVID lockdown was not a perfect thing for them to be doing. And so we managed to negotiate a deal that had multiple elements to it, including leveraging off other parts of the portfolio and some deferment elements. And, you know, bought this big unicorn in the middle of Chester, which has proven extremely sort of lucrative since then. And that was like, right, one of these a year for the next 10 years, all I need, nothing more. And it's way less work because, you know, as you said, the industry kind of goes, play the numbers, get out there, view 100 properties a month, offer on all of them 20% or 25% below market value, you know, the standard sort of stuff, which is miserable in itself. And I much prefer going, find one property that is the right property with the right set of circumstances, view it once, offer on it once, get one deal, that's it. And so generally I'll only see 5 to 10 properties a year now, and we're buying 1 to 2 properties a year in our portfolio.
I love that. You are such a man after my own heart. Mine comes from a position of being very busy, a mum, you know, multiple kind of people relying on me, lots of things going on. And I just don't have time for that. Spending hours going out, buying donuts, sitting and having a coffee with the agent. I mean, that's all very nice, but I don't even have that time with my family or my friends. So I hardly want to do that with an estate agent. So I'm exactly the same. I know that if I'm going to view a property, unless something looks very different to what I imagine, I'm going to be making an offer on it. Yeah. I just, you know, I know all of those parameters. So yeah, absolutely. But I thought we'd just jump in. So Temi's asked a really fantastic question. And I think this basically, this interview should answer that. But she said, what's the next natural step after building a portfolio of buy-to-lets?
Great question. And I hate to say this, but Temi, it depends. So number one, it depends on what you're trying to achieve, what your aims are. And I'd say it also depends on the mechanics or the metrics in that existing portfolio. So the way that I look at portfolios, when I started in property, I was all about buy, right? I just want to keep buying. That's going to be my pension pot. I'm going to keep accumulating until the day I shuffle off this, you know, this mortal coil, and then the kids will get it all. I've changed that mentality quite a lot, I'd say, since COVID. And that is a portfolio, I think, should be a fluid entity. And every year what I do is I do sort of a strategic sort of review of the portfolio. Look at what equity do I have in different properties, what returns on a property by property basis. And what I'll generally do is go, what is the return on equity in that property? How's it performing? So when I'm buying property, I look at what's return on capital employed. That's like the initial metric I use to assess a deal. But after you've owned it for years, right, you could have a load of capital growth. The metrics will be very different. So, you know, if you've got, let's just be ridiculous. Let's say you've got a couple of £100,000 worth of equity in a property and it's giving you £2,000 a year post-tax income, right? We could do way more with that. So actually there needs to be that constant cycle of portfolio optimization, release equity to be roll into new deals. And that should be quite a fluid process. So that's the first thing I'd say. Second thing is holding a portfolio should be there for cash flow. So there should be a point where it's giving you the life that you want to lead, right? When you get to that point, you then have the flexibility to do whatever you want to do. Fantastic place to be. So metric one is always security. We want a portfolio to pay for our lives, just like the basics, pay for our rent, mortgage, bills. Metric two is, can we actually now lead a life, which is freedom, right? So when we have that, we can then start doing whatever we want. We could, try development, larger things. So I run mine like a sort of a risk pyramid, if you like. And at the bottom, my portfolio is built on, I'd say, really boring blocks of flats or mixed-use buildings with leases on. So, set them up, FRI leases, 10 years, set and forget, don't go into the place for 10 years. That's the base. Above that, I've got some higher cash flowing stuff. So I still do have some single lets, which I'm naturally sort of selling on a annual basis. I've got some HMOs in there still, which is sort of higher, slightly cash flowing. And then as we go up, I go into my short-term let side of my portfolio, which is more work, more effort, but a lot more cash flow. But I don't want to be completely exposed to that, right? That side of the market. I know that if that all goes missing, right, everything is supported by the bottom part of the portfolio. So it's important to understand what you're trying to achieve and why. And a lot of people go, wait a minute, you talked about focus. You've got sort of leases, you've got buy-to-lets, you've got HMOs, you've got short-term accommodation. I get that, but it's all the same property type. So in terms of focus, when I'm out there sourcing, negotiating, developing my relationships with the commercial agents, buying, it's one specific property type. And then I decide what I'm going to do with that property type, depending on the sort of dynamics of the area, the demand in the area, all that sort of stuff. Okay. So you're just looking for one thing, buying one sort of thing. And then, if I'm totally honest, leases are easy, park those, short-term accommodation, have a management function in place. So you can focus on the day-to-day.
Amazing. Well, I hope, Temi, that answered that question for you. Really, really great answer. So, and just to clarify, guys, because most of us talk about ROI, return on investment, and Rob mentioned ROCE, so return on capital employed. So that basically means the money left in. So, if you were to just go ahead and buy a property with a deposit, 25%, that's your capital left in. But if you do these creative methods that we've spoken about, you might buy something, add some value, refinance and pull most of your money out. But let's say you've left 5, 10, 15, 20,000 pounds in there. What are you getting on return of that? So I love that as well. It's so important, isn't it, to look at the equity involved. And that's where we talk about, if you've got if you've done it the traditional way, you've saved up money, you've bought a property, perhaps you've got your own property that you've been paying down, you've got this whacking great load of equity, and it's just sat there doing nothing. And I'm always like, people say to me, I've got no money, I've got nothing, I don't know what to do. And I'm like, but you've got 450 grand's worth of equity in your property. What are you talking about? You've got loads. And that is, to me, it's coined, isn't it, as lazy money.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
So many people have got that. And I think that is just, really, really key.
And it depends. I mean, it depends what you're trying to achieve, which is what I said, depends on your own goals and other things that are going on. And there's no one size fits all for all of this. And it also depends on your own risk tolerance and risk structure. And what you'll generally find is, as you get more equity, more wealth, right, you're quite happy to de-risk and have lower returns. So I'd always say, when you're starting off, you're probably going to be looking for higher returning style properties, probably more work, less of them out there. You're gonna have to put more of your sweat equity in to, add that value, turn it around to get that higher ROCE. If you got 10 million worth of equity, you only need 5% return on that, right? And you're getting, what's that, 500,000 a year in terms of income from a 10 million portfolio at 5% return. So depending on your circumstances, it's going to depend on your risk level and therefore what returns you're looking for.
And I think one of the things that really made me laugh, and I think when you come into this kind of industry, property, stocks and shares, there's this certain kind of sexiness around it, isn't there? And that you've got to get bigger. And now, this is my site, I'm building 10 houses on here. But actually, you get so many people that have perhaps gone through your journey, and inherently they now just want boring.
Yeah.
You want to get to the stage, and especially as you get older, you want to be spending, I'm sorry, we've got dogs going mad. I hope you can't hear too much. You want to be spending time, doing all the stuff that you want.
Yeah, 100%. And I'll take over while you deal with the barking dogs. Yeah, look, I will never forget. I had a mentor once about sort of 8 years ago who actually was a sort of M&A, mergers and acquisitions entrepreneur. So very, very wealthy, multi-millionaire. He's doing, 7-figure transactions with businesses. And I remember talking to him about property. It's like, look, do you do property development or investment? He's like, why would I do that? That involves work. It's like, all I do is take my money and stick it into wealth banking. And he said anything over 8% return, he doesn't touch because it's too risky for him. And it involves actually making decisions. So he just gives it to a wealth manager, target 5 to 8% return through a wealth manager. But when you've got, 50 million, you're struggling to spend that, just the interest or the returns at that sort of level on that amount of equity.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's kind of talk into, how to get to this boring scenario where you can go and get your kicks from doing all the fun things, like maybe flying a plane or jumping out of a plane or whatever it is, or, spending more time on holiday. In fact, I was talking to, another lady, and she's taking her kids out of school and going to an English speaking school in Africa for 3 months. These kind of things are really incredible. And certainly, these are sort of things I'm talking about. So you have talked about looking at 5 to 10 properties per year. So this is a real change. A lot of the kind of, property gurus and training companies, they're telling you to probably visit that many a week, and an offer on all of them, as you say, offer maybe 25% below market value. So how is it that you get to this stage where you've managed to formulate it down into being so specific? Can you give, obviously that's like a long way, but can you give some kind of idea of what you're getting to be able to view so few?
For sure. I think to clarify, everything always sounds easy when you talk about it, right? And there's always selling the dream and all of that sort of stuff. You're not just going to get to that stage on day one, right? You're gonna have to do some groundwork to get there. You're gonna have to understand your area, understand the the stock dynamics and the property dynamics in your area, understand exactly what strategy you're looking at. You still got to build relationships. Like I have a few very high value relationships with commercial agents who are generally independent surveyors who get access to a lot of this sort of stock. And then it's understanding how to structure and break down and appraise these sort of deals. Okay, they are quite different to your standard buy-to-let, even your sort of standard HMO type property. So we're not necessarily looking at things on a bricks and mortar basis, comparable basis. A lot of the stuff that I do in my portfolio and teach my clients is how to manipulate the commercial valuation methodology in order to add value very quickly without doing any, I call it any of the building stuff, right? So any construction. Construction to me is hard work, it's expensive, there's loads of moving parts. And show me somebody, no offense to builders, who have had a seamless start to finish journey in construction. It just doesn't happen. And the reason for that is property is a fluid industry, right? Things are changing all the time. You have a property, you don't know exactly what you're getting. You're dealing with labor forces which are volatile. So it never happens as you want it to happen, and it always ends up taking more time and costing more money. And that is opportunity cost. So when people talk about the figures of their deals, very often they're not talking about the opportunity cost. They're like, here's my deal, but they haven't mentioned that it's taken them 18 months and cost another 50 grand than they're expecting, and so much, in interest and all of that sort of stuff. That all needs to be included in your deal appraisal. So we very much try and add value through non-traditional, non-construction methods. And that's a process. That's a process to understand how to appraise it. Everything is a system. Everything can be learned. When you have a paint by number system, anybody can do it. You just got to learn how to do the process. Because I've been doing it for a long time, I've got the ability to look at a property, whether it's on or off market, understand how to unlock the value add. What can we do non-traditionally to add the value, and therefore what do we want to buy it for? And because we're looking at things in a different light to other people, this is an interesting concept, and I think a few people struggle to get the head around it. As you say, look, the training industry says below market value, below market value, below market value. Therefore, you look at the price, and with bricks and mortar, below market value is quite a crude thing. There's only one way you can do it. You buy it more cheaply than it's worth bricks and mortar, right? And you try and add value and get a margin with that. When you're looking at commercial, and when I say commercial, a commercial valuation, we can buy something even sometimes above bricks and mortar value, but still add value in other ways that creates that margin to then be able to refinance the funds out. So if you have the ability to do that, and if you're metricing a sort of return on capital employed rather than just a BMV metric to buy something, it opens a whole load of other routes we can go down, which are really cool, really interesting, and actually go in and give good, very solid offers to sellers who are generally more sophisticated because what they're selling is a bit more sophisticated, and with elements of creativity, deferment, and sort of negotiate these deals quite quickly, trumping a lot of the competition, if I'm totally honest with you. And so that's kind of how we do things. So we just have to learn that system.
Yeah, I love that. And I think these different strategies, when you talk about, especially around this kind of like below market value. So, I really love purchase lease options. And I know you've spoken about those as well. But the funny thing I find when people ask you about that, they say, oh, I want to do an option agreement on this particular property. They want 500,000. I'm thinking I'm going to offer them 400,000. I'm thinking, what? So you want to offer them less than they currently want, even though you think the value of it is only 400,000. I understand that, but then you want to pay them in the future. My view is with those kind of things is basically you've got to offer them what they want.
Yeah, correct.
With then creating, as you've mentioned, these kind of different sort of perhaps non-traditional methods of purchase, which then makes it more attractive in the long run. But it is, I absolutely love the way you talk, you sort of talk about that, because people get so stuck on this price. So when I think of my own purchase lease option, probably at the time, the price that we agreed, you could have said it was, maybe a bit inflated, but it didn't really matter, because what we were then doing with that property was adding value. We did do a bit of, obviously change around. We changed a school into 16 studio apartments. But equally, the value of it now is, it's blown out of the water compared to what it was before. So it didn't really matter at that moment what it was. We had to give the vendor what he wanted. He needed to have a great deal. He needed to feel like it was a benefit to him. And I have to say, when you work in that way, he absolutely loves it. I mean, he doesn't come around very often, but when he does come around, he's like, oh, I love it. He feels, he lived in this he was part of this property for like 25 years. And he's so thrilled that we've continued the building, because people get emotionally involved with buildings. Us as property investors should not really. But people do get involved, and when they see that you're doing such a great job, then they're going to tell their friends and all of those things. And you can grow from that when you spoke about those relationships.
Yeah, it's the classic with creative. It's your price, my terms, or my price, your terms. It's not my terms, my price. That's probably not going to go down very well.
Yeah, exactly. So going back, so you spoke about the area, the stock, the strategy, the relationship, how to sort of structure your deals. So when it comes down to we just sort of pick those apart a little bit. Area. So I'm always a huge fan, even though I live down south, of investing locally. Now everyone will say, oh, well, it's so expensive. But one, there are deals. There definitely are deals. I think in any town, there's always a deal, because there's always people dying, getting divorced, all of those kind of things, or unable to sell. So that's how we were able to do our option agreement. How do you feel? Because obviously there is this kind of north-south divide. Where are you at in the area type thing?
So my preference is always, when I start working with the client, we focus on, the first thing we do is like, what's the area? What's the strategy? And I would say we want to pick a strategy that you're engaged with. That's the main thing, that you're resourced for and you're engaged with. There's no point doing serviced accommodation if you hate the thought of having short-term tenants or managing short-term tenants, right? It's like, don't force yourself into something because you've been on a training course to learn how to do SA or HMOs. I've seen that happen a lot, and it's miserable, right? People are like, no, you've got to be engaged with it as part of the process, part of your vision. So I would say pick with something you're engaged and want to do. And ideally, you want to try and do it in your local area, wherever that may be. So that is the ideal. Now, I do understand that some strategies will not work in a local area. Depends where you live. I also agree with you that the narrative of you have to go up north to invest is absolute rubbish, right? It's just wrong. So if you want to get cheap properties, yes, they are up north. If you're investing for the ROCE that we talked about earlier, that return on capital employed, we can get ROCEs anywhere. We just have to be able to add the value. So if we buy something for $1 million, but we can add the value by 400,000 and recycle capital out, right? As long as the income is big enough after higher debt costs these days, we're still going to get a great ROCE. So you're absolutely right. Deals are everywhere. And by the way, there's some fantastic yielding areas in the South Coast, Portsmouth, Southampton, those sort of areas. You've still got very, very good gross yields in those areas. So yeah, you 100% do not have to go up north. That said, if you do want to invest remotely for a strategy that works for you, I've also got no issue with that, but don't scattergun, right? Pick one place that works, have a really tight radius around it, and you only go there. But you have to understand it's going to be more work for you because you're going to have to travel to get into the area. I always recommend that everybody gets involved themselves rather than just outsources the sourcing, all that sort of stuff. Because you need to understand the area, the dynamics, what you're buying. And you need to have a trusted team, management agents, builders, all of that sort of stuff. So I live in Winchester. All of my stuff is in Chester, 5-mile radius of Chester. I do go up once a fortnight because my kids are up there anyway. So I go and combine kid time and portfolio time when I'm up there. And it works absolutely brilliantly for me, right? I've got no issue doing that.
Fantastic, brilliant. So yeah, anyone, let's hear your thoughts. Are you local in the chat or far? Whether you like to or taxi. I always say to people, have you paid all this money to do a course to become a taxi driver? Because that's inherently what happens, isn't it? They spend hours and hours going up and back. And I believe the one thing for me about local is that you start to generate your own luck. And I don't agree with luck. But because you're on the ground, because you're there regularly, because you're picking up the kids, because you're, going to the gym, you naturally are able to network locally, build a real following. And it's, you know what's happening in that environment as well. So yeah, definitely. So yeah, so you've spoken about a specific, type of property. So yeah, can you sort of, tell us a little bit more about what that looks for you when you're looking?
Yeah. So when we talk about unicorns, and just to clarify, my definition of a unicorn is you should be able to add at least £100,000 worth of value within 6 months, right? So 6 figures within 6 months is kind of my golden rule in terms of value add. And that means it takes out the planning system. So we're not looking for things with planning gain. PD, potentially. So some types of commercial conversion, depending on the type of property, but that's a bit more niche. It also has to create at least £3,000 a month worth of rent roll. Okay, so we're talking larger, higher density units, and we should be able to do it using creative strategies or other people's money and structure it in that way. So that's my definition of a unicorn. Now, within that, we've got various strategies that I teach. My favored, and I kind of always go like 80-20 with strategy. I want a primary and a secondary. My primary is called the urban goldmine. And that is mixed use buildings, generally some form of retail, commercial on the ground floor, and uppers that have already, this is important, already been converted into some form of residential, because that takes away all the uncertainty. I think that's an amazing sweet spot for the reason that residential investors don't like the commercial. They're scared horribly of commercial property. Commercial landlords don't like the residential because it's a nightmare for them. So there's a much smaller pool of people looking to buy this sort of property, right? And we can get some great deals and do some amazing things with it. So that's my primary strategy. And my secondary is the apart hotel. So that's generally buying old sort of B&Bs, guest houses, even commercial things, and turning them into that apart hotel. So high density, sort of high quality, boutique, bed city style, short-term let accommodation. But most of my attention is on the urban goldmine.